Tokyo Xtreme Racer Drift 2 was given a 4 out of 10 by IGN when it was released. GameSpot gave it a 52 out of 100, Games Radar gave it a 6 out of 10, and G4TV gave it a 1 out of 5. However, I just played TXRD2 for the very first time last month, and I loved it. So in this video, I want to put forth my own review or retrospective of sorts and pick some excerpts from these older articles to comment on so we can see if they have any validity to them. Am I the one just blinded by old school Japanese nostalgia, or was TXRD2 actually ahead of its time? After all, I'm not the only one who likes this game. It is a certified cult classic, and the Metacritic user scores are much more favorable. Now, I have played a good handful of the TXR games over the years, and when I said I just played Drift 2 for the first time, that isn't technically true. I've dabbled in the game before, booted it up, played through the first maybe 2 or so hours, and then set it down. Not because I didn't enjoy it, but because I just wanted to get a feel for the game so I could have a more complete picture of the series as a whole. For years now, that has been my primary experience with the Drift or Kaido offshoots of TXR games. Just a few quick drive-bys to get a feel for what the games are about. But I've never really sunk my teeth into Drift 2 until now, and I owe it an apology because I wasn't really familiar with this game. To set the stage for anyone less familiar with the series, Tokyo Xtreme Racer, which also goes by other names depending on the game and region it's sold in, is a series focused primarily around street racing on Tokyo's highway network. The main map you drive on has never really changed from the beginning. It's always been a recreation of the Shitoko Expressway surrounding the greater Tokyo region. Some games have added or removed certain routes, or in some cases taken you to additional locations, but by and large, TXR has always been about Tokyo's highways. The games also have a consistent story and timeline throughout. You will meet and race against many of the same drivers and teams across all the different games, and they do grow and change. Drivers will get new cars, new bits of lore, leave or join new teams. There is a lot of depth to the hundreds if not thousands of drivers you can meet across every game. Now, TXR Drift, also known as Kaido Battle or Kaido Racer, is an offshoot series that focuses instead on toge racing. Don't be fooled, these aren't really drifting games, they're racing games set on mountain roads that do sometimes have drift events. But they do take place within the same universe as the main series. You'll see plenty of familiar names in Drift 2 that will then later carry on back to the main series. So hopefully that gives you a good idea of what this game and series is all about, and with that, let's get into the review proper. As always, I like to start by talking about handling. This is a major discussion point for the game. GameSpot stated in their review that the game's biggest problem is that the cars handle more like boats than cars. Even with your car totally pimped out, it's a struggle to make it through anything other than the gentlest curve without grazing the wall because the cars are so unresponsive. IGN wrote, regardless of what machine you choose or how upgraded it is, the car never imparts a sense of speed or control. They go on to say that this is unforgivable, especially when you're trying to corner around a series of hairpin turns and you wind up pinballing back and forth between guardrails regardless of how you've been driving or how fast you're going. This is the major criticism in every negative review I found, even in some of the positive ones. And the thing is, they're not entirely wrong. Let's split the handling into two parts, grip and drift. Grip driving in this game is challenging. You should not go into this expecting an arcadey, black box Need for Speed style handling model. In fact, the cars behave much more similar to simulators of the time, like Gran Turismo. The roads are also very narrow. You're not driving on 4-lane city streets. These are tight, winding mountain certain passes, which does amp up the difficulty. However, if you go in expecting a challenging but rewarding old-school console sim experience, you're gonna get that. The grip driving is hard, but it's consistent, decently realistic, rewarding, and completely manageable. There is a high skill bar to it. You need to be focused and always thinking a corner ahead, but that adds to it to me. That's what toge racing should feel like, and they try to drive that point home throughout a lot of the game. Toge is the ultimate driving challenge, and it is hard to master. This game actually forced me to adapt to roll steering instead of tap steering with a joystick, because you are rewarded so heavily for being smooth and precise with your inputs. Even with high ABS, you still want to manage your brakes, and throttle control is critical, but you can learn it. You can be good at the grip driving and can reliably avoid ping-ponging between guardrails. I also don't really agree with both GameSpot and IGN's criticism of the lack of speed. Yes, it feels slower than Most Wanted or something, where they add motion blur and camera shake and have you driving 200 miles an hour on big wide roads, but Drift 2 still feels fast in its own way. Again, more similar to a console sim of the time. I wouldn't say the grip driving is perfect. Some cars absolutely feel much worse than others, and it feels a bit more raw or less polished than something like GT4. It is very punishing if you're not on your game at all times, but I do like it. Again, it mimics the mystical air surrounding real toge racing. It fits the overall direction of the game. Now on the flip side, for the game's namesake, drifting, unfortunately in TXRD2, the drifting is far from perfect. Like the grip driving, it's very challenging, but possible. If you spend enough time on it, you could link a full course without hitting a guardrail, but even an experienced player would struggle to accomplish that. You're always drifting on the knife's edge within a very narrow window of success, where just a bit too much angle, going just a bit too shallow, or transitioning slightly too aggressively will throw you completely off your line. There's not much room to correct. You need to be precise, and you need to drift in a fairly specific way. The game rewards downshifts on entry to unsettle the rear, soft feint entries, and smooth transitions, or just straightening instead of a transition so the car can settle. To add to this, drift events will delete your score in a corner if you so much as graze a barrier. No wall taps allowed in TXRD2, so not only is the drift handling hard, but the gameplay makes it punishing as well. Now I will say that the required scores for almost every event in the game are pretty easy to hit anyway. Throughout my time playing, I only ever needed to repeat a handful of drift events, and the only major drifting challenges exist later in the game, with a few optional rivals that require you to beat them down the mountain while also beating their drift score, or in the optional sponsor challenges, where you do need to drift every single corner with a minimum score per corner without touching a wall the whole time. But even those didn't feel too unreasonable in most cases. So drifting well is very challenging and requires some serious practice to get even decent at, but luckily the game doesn't ask too much of you. The required drifting events are easy enough to clear, and everything that's harder is optional. Here's what IGN had to say about the drifting. Whenever you try to drift, either the car sticks to the road, barely sliding a foot when you pump your brakes or pull your e-brake, or it performs as if it's hydroplaning through an oil slick without any possible control available. Many times you'll find yourself simply abandoning the pursuit of drifting to simply make it across the finish line in the time allotted. GameSpot said this: "It's even worse when you try to drift. Your car will start to slide, and then it's almost impossible to control." And perhaps my favorite comment about drifting comes from G4, who said, "The clumsy game mechanics make pulling off a successful drift about as likely as there not being another Fast and Furious sequel." And I can't disagree too strongly here. The drifting is just too stressful and precise to feel fun for me. It's just not worth the time investment. Every now and then I'll nail a corner or a transition and it feels nice, and if the back steps out in a rear-wheel drive car, that's fine. But if you're going into this expecting to expertly link an entire course, you just aren't gonna get there without some serious effort, which is a bummer, because in a game called Drift 2 that has so many of the best cars and roads in the world for drifting, I wish it were a bit more accessible. possible. In all, I think the driving experience in TXRD2 is a bit of a mixed bag. It leans more towards sim than I think most people would expect. It's very demanding and precise, and it certainly could have used a bit more tuning and polish on controllers to smoothen the inputs. But overall, it didn't turn me off the game, and I consider myself to be pretty picky about handling. But now let's get to the meat of the game, the main career known as Conquest mode. This mode has you taking on the role of an unknown racer new to the scene, and your goal, as always, is to make a name for yourself by rising through the ranks, gaining a fan base, and defeating the bosses of each location. The career is split into day and night. During the day, you can compete in officially sanctioned events on any track you've unlocked, either through normal, advanced, or even master races. You can also compete in gymkhana during the day, or take on new sponsors by completing their challenges. This is your time to shop for cars, buy upgrades, chat with other drivers in the pits, or get some practice on any route you want to learn. When you're ready, you can advance to nighttime, and this is where a lot of the main game's progression takes place. Here you'll be bouncing between various parking areas looking for rival drivers and teams to take down. Beat enough drivers and eventually you'll get an invite from a slasher, a boss NPC for each course that usually unlocks a new region after being defeated. So generally speaking, daytime is for making money and managing your garage, while nighttime is more focused around progressing the story. There's absolutely some crossover. You do make money from night battles, and sometimes you need to complete events during the day to get rivals to appear at night, but there is still a clear gameplay distinction between the two times that makes each feel unique and valuable. There is an immense variety of content here too. Like I mentioned, each course during the day has a set of normal races, one time trial, one drift event, and then a harder time trial with an SP gauge. Then as you increase your category level by doing well in events, you'll start to unlock advanced races, which have unique restrictions like Subarus only, 1000cc or less engines, and so on. These are also only available on certain days and can award medals, which are required to battle some rivals at night. Finally, you can gain access to master races, which will have even more strict rule sets, like forcing the use of a specific car. You also want to be checking parking areas during the day, because on occasion, sponsors will be waiting to give you a challenge, and these can be very lucrative. You can also run into rivals in certain locations, like the car dealer or parts shop, which will then show up that night at a certain parking area to race you. So there is a wide variety of content to complete during the day, but like I said, nighttime is where the real progress happens. There are, by my count, 8 different types of rivals that all have unique characteristics. Teams, supporters, high gamblers, medalists, tricksters, and so on. Defeating a supporter will increase your number of fans, but getting beat by one will cause you to lose a portion of your fan base. High gamblers will bet a ton of money on each race, which can be pretty lucrative, but if you lose, your own wallet will take a pretty big hit. Each rival will also challenge you to a different style of race. There are FL, LF, TA, TAC, and CAT style races, all of which have their own rule sets, so each and every rival battle feels unique. Of course, added by the fact that they all have unique dialogue and bios that you can read before every race. GameSpot called these dialogues lame, but I loved them. They were just campy and silly enough to be funny without pulling me out of the game. There is also a rare chance after every battle that that rival will become your friend, and if a rival becomes your friend, you can use their car in some events. This all makes the racing so much more meaningful and fun. You aren't just completing a checklist of races against no-name opponents, it's immersing you into a world of street racing with real drivers that actually have backstories and weight within the story as a whole. Like I said earlier, once you establish enough dominance in a certain area, you'll get an invite from that course's slasher, and this might be a good perfect time to talk about the email and BBS or forum system, because while I would bet a lot of players ignore this outside of what's necessary, this system's amazing. All car guys know that online forums are the home of every enthusiast. You're not a real Subaru fan in the US if you don't have a Naziok account. And can you even say you owned an S chassis if you haven't posted on Zilvia? Car forums are an enormous part of car culture, and TXRD2 emulates that, with a message board that they use to give you lore, Easter eggs, and in-game tips and hints. Every day, the BBS will be flooded with new posts that you can read to give you an insight on the current state of the story. If you beat a certain rival the previous night, they'll usually post about it the next day. Or if you're having trouble finding a certain rival, chances are good that someone posted a message about only seeing them on rainy Tuesday nights. If you need tuning or modding advice, you can follow a few threads that will immersively and progressively explain the mechanics to you. While the emails and BBS posts are mostly optional and can feel overwhelming later when the boards are sometimes flooded with dozens of new messages every day, this is still an incredibly smart and well-utilized system that adds an immersive and unique in-game method for delivering information to the player. I loved reading through these posts every day. Even though each character is technically nothing more than a silhouette, they manage to have so much personality through their dialogue, forum posts, and bios, and it adds this immense depth of life to the game that I've rarely ever seen before. The story as a whole actually had me pretty engaged. I was really curious to see when certain rivals would appear, if one character was actually another person in disguise, if one team was going to end up betraying another. At the risk of sounding like every reviewer ever, it's very Dark Soulsy in a sense that on the surface, you're just working through levels, beating enemies and bosses that say silly things, and then becoming the king of the world or whatever. But if you actually take the time to read the optional text, you realize how much depth and meaning there is to every single thing happening in the game. I absolutely loved the story and pacing of TXRD2. It was an absolute treat to have something so different to what we get today in modern AAA game stories that feel so shallow. GameSpot, however, had a very different opinion. They described the story as nonsensical, saying that the story is a complete mess and unfolds via a series of inane message board posts that are somehow less coherent than real message boards. It's impossible to follow the story even if you wanted to, but thankfully it doesn't matter much. And although I do agree that you really don't need to follow the story if you don't want to, I think GameSpot just got this one wrong. The story, in my opinion, is quite easy to follow if you pay attention to the message boards, and it adds a lot of intrigue to the gameplay for the players that want it. Now, I will say that I did have some issues with the gameplay side of the career. To start, I chose a Honda City Turbo as my first car. It was a lovely little thing, but it wasn't allowed in any of the initial advanced races, which either required a rear-wheel drive or non-turbo vehicle. So with what little money I had, I bought a cheap NA FR Toyota, a used 8.5, which logically sucked and couldn't win any of the races I needed it to, even when upgraded. So with that money wasted, I needed to grind out some more, sell the 8.5, and pick up another better used car to finally compete in and win the early advanced races. This meant that the first few hours of my time playing were a bit more frustrating and repetitive than they should have been. I think some of those early rough spots could have been smoothed over by having starter cars that actually work for the starter events, or better yet, by just having a wider variety of starter events that actually fit the cars you're able to start with. Luckily, this is an easy problem to get around. Just start with a rear-wheel drive, naturally aspirated car, and you'll be fine. And once I did get over that initial hump, the rest of the game's pacing and progression felt fantastic, all the way up to the point I rolled credits. You are always unlocking something new, there's always something to do, and I never felt that I needed to grind too much, but let's put a pin in that. I want to talk about the gymkhana events as well, which felt half-baked. I think it's clear they had other plans that didn't make it in for release. Every course has its own set of 10 gymkhana events, but they're all the exact same. The level 6 event at Haruna is the same layout as the level 6 event anywhere else. It's just that the payout is higher and the time limit is shorter in the later courses. There's also really no need whatsoever to do anything besides the level 10 course, which makes you the most money. You don't need to unlock each course in order. If you can do the last one, just do the last one. These events are also by far the quickest way to make money. You can complete the level 10 event in about 30 seconds, and if you have good sponsors, will make millions of credits each run. So by the time you make it to the mid-game or so, within 5 or 10 minutes, you can have enough money to buy and upgrade some of the most expensive cars in the game. And I do like that money comes easy, because especially towards the end game, you're gonna want to be buying a lot of cars, and you don't want to have to spend hours grinding for that. I do just wish that the gymkhana events had more layout variety and some progression that made the early events still worth playing at least once. I think they could have even just had one layout and event per course to spread it out a bit. That would have made more sense, but ultimately, gymkhana is totally optional, it doesn't affect progression at all, and it's a great way to make fast money, so this is a smaller nitpick. Now, speaking of progression, I do also want to get back to the whole advanced races and sea level thing. Early on, I thought that the officially sanctioned day races were important for progression. They seem like they are, and there's a lot of them to do, so I made every effort to try and complete every daytime race I could. But then, about halfway through the game, I realized you actually don't really need to do the advanced races. The progression comes almost exclusively through beating rivals at night. So, because the advanced races often require you to buy new cars and grind levels a bit repetitively, I kinda stopped doing them unless they were convenient and I already had the car. Gymkhana made me more money and night racing progressed the story, so the advanced races felt a bit unnecessary. And this brings us to kinda my last major point of the story and career progression. I didn't actually finish TXRD2. Now, I did roll credits on the game, twice in fact, but there is an extensive post-game that really changes things up on you. Without spoiling anything, the major boss of the game is a character called Emotional King, who essentially realized he had no one left to battle, so he disappeared from the scene and 2 other drivers took his place, Absolute Emperor and Miracle's Summit. Beating these 2 drivers is technically how you beat the game, and it's fairly easy to get there. However, once those credits roll, you are far from finished. There will still be dozens, if not hundreds of rivals left, and a handful of major story threads to wrap up. But this is where the game gets really TXR-y. Rivals in the TXR series sometimes have specific requirements. For example, they'll only race you if you're in a Subaru, or they only show up on stormy nights. And throughout the main game of TXRD2, most of these rivals are optional or have very easy requirements. But once you beat the game, the difficulty ramps up tenfold, and you'll need to beat 4 prerequisite rivals and then get in a naturally aspirated 1998 Daihatsu midget with blue paint on a cloudy Thursday night to get a specific rival to appear so that you can hopefully beat that rival and unlock progress towards taking down a big team. It's cool in theory, and the forum posts, like I mentioned earlier, can sometimes help, but realistically, it's just not feasible to work through the endgame without a guide if you want to beat the game within any reasonable time frame. You also do need to reach much higher levels in those category races, which I hadn't done at all for like the last 10 or so hours of my playthrough, so I was very underleveled and would have had to do a lot of grinding there just to get up to par with where the game expected me to be. Of course, to a certain degree that is user error, I accept that, but I think a lot of players probably will and have come to the same conclusion, because if you're paying attention to the progression of the main game, then you'll realize, like I did, that you can skip the category races almost entirely. So take advice from me, if you're a new player and want to complete the end game, don't skip out on raising your category level, otherwise it'll come back to bite you later on. And expect to have a guide open once you get into the end game. Otherwise you'll spend a lot of time on repetitive grinding and menu navigation to try and find the right rivals. Which actually brings me to my final critique of TXRD2's career, the menu navigation. Many of the reviews mentioned this. It's very old school, kind of JRPG style, where you'll be spending a lot of time in menus. And for example, in order to install a single car part, you need to click through like 5 confirmation windows. One of the major mechanics of the game is checking parking areas for potential rivals or sponsors, but that means you have to load into each and every parking area every single day and night, which towards the end of the game, when you have a lot of courses unlocked, takes a really long time. I would have loved to see just a simple notification dot or something in the top level menu so that you could tab through the courses to see which ones had something of interest, instead of having to spend time loading into each and every environment. It's one of those minor things that really didn't start bothering me until late into the game, but it's definitely worth noting. Now, before we move on to talk about cars, I think it's time we actually addressed the courses themselves. TXRD2 has almost 20 unique courses, all of which are real locations in Japan famous for drifting or toge. A lot of the routes from Initial D are in this game, and most courses were actually laser scanned to be as accurate as possible. And I think this might be the very first example of using laser scanning to model racetracks in a video game. It's a much more common practice now, but back in the day, most real-world locations were modeled using reference images and satellite data. If anyone knows of a racing game that did this earlier, let me know, but I think this might be the first. And even if it's just one of the first, that's still really cool. It's yet another detail that adds life and variety to the game. Every course feels real and unique. They all have their own style and vibe to them, and at no point did I feel like a location overstayed its welcome. As soon as I started to get familiar with one course, I'd unlock a whole nother handful of them. It's a very strong roster of locations, and even after more than 30 hours in the game, I still didn't feel like I had any course mastered, and I just wanted to keep driving all of them. Of course, weather and time of day add even more variety, and some tracks even have extra details, like semi-randomized construction areas that add a level of RNG, or the cherry blossom petals blowing in the wind of some tracks, which was even something GameSpot was keen to mention. On the flip side though, they also said that most of the courses look the same. You'll see lots of trees and the same signs repeatedly. For the most part, they're designed the same because it's often impossible to discern one course from the next. And I really couldn't disagree more. Yes, at the end of the day, you're always on a mountain road in Japan, and that limits the scope, but the snowy, barren peaks of Mount Zhao look nothing like the warm, lush, sun-kissed roads at Usui. Maybe it's because so many of these locations are real places I have other connections to, but to me, every course felt special. So for the career, outside of some smaller issues with the pacing, which were in part user error and bad luck and not things every player will run into, and some features that felt a bit incomplete or poorly balanced, overall, I absolutely loved the career of TXRD2. It's got variety, it's got depth, it's got tons of content, it's got challenge, and it feels like a real career. I felt immersed in the world and set goals for myself and felt accomplished reaching certain milestones. It was absolutely a highlight of the game. And speaking of highlights, guys, finally it's time to talk about the cars. TXRD2's roster of Japanese and some European classics is nearly unmatched. The car list totals something like 160 to 170 or so cars by my count, and you've got just about every major Japanese brand. Honda, Mazda, Mitsubishi, Nissan, Subaru, Toyota, and more. And it's not just the legends. Let's take Subaru, for example. You'd expect a few Impreza generations in a few different trims perhaps, but in D2 you also get a healthy roster of legacies. I mean, essentially every generation in both sedan and wagon, as well as more rare trims like the B4. You get 2 Foresters, you get the Alcyone and the SVX, and you get some of Subaru's K cars. Nissan has, of course, every generation of S chassis, Skyline, and Z, but also 3 different generations of the Laurel and 3 generations of the March. Funny enough, the car list was actually the only positive thing G4 had to say about the whole game. Well, barely. They said that The fact that there are a number of cars to choose from is little consolation for the hours and hours you'll spend shuffling through confusing game menus. And GameSpot said that while there are some nice cars available, most of the roster is unimpressive. Most of the cars are subcompacts, there are too many older models, and many of the different models are virtually indistinguishable from one another. And I do get that this was an era of supercars, and the roster definitely does lean towards more obscure Japanese K cars and the like, but I think this is kind of a case of TXRD2 being ahead of its time for a Western market. Back in the mid-2000s, really just the Halo cars were popular over here. Your R34s, Mark IV Supras, and S-chassis. Nobody playing NFS Underground knew what a Laurel or a Stagea was, let alone a Suzuki Alto Works. So I get that perspective. I think it's understandable for the time, and some people still hold the mentality of like, oh, if it doesn't make 300 horsepower, how could it be cool? But this car list is truly a JDM lover's dream, and it gets way better because they even have custom-tuned special models. So you have Nob Taniguchi's S15, an Ari Amamiya FD, and a Group B Starion. The car list isn't just JDMs either. You also have a handful of Euros from VW, Renault, Fiat, Mercedes, and more to round out the roster. I made some earlier comparisons to Gran Turismo when talking about handling, but the car list is also like a more tuner, Japanese-focused Gran Turismo car roster. You just have really anything a Japanese car guy could ever want from this era. I mean, compare this to the black box era Need for Speed games of the same time, where you only had around 30 cars per game. And you might be about to make an argument about customization, but don't be fooled, because TXR isn't necessarily lacking there either. There is, to start, a great roster of wheels from brands like Raze, NK, Advan, Watanabe, and more. You're gonna find so many classic Japanese wheels that look great. Then, onto the body of the car, just about every vehicle is gonna have a body kit. Sadly, just one, but still, they're all pretty good looking, and there's a lot more to add. You can also put canards on just about every single car, and there are multiple styles, and some cars even get custom ones. The same is true for rear wings. Almost every car gets access to the GT wing customization, where you can pick the wing style, mounting point, riser height, and end plates. You can install carbon fiber hoods and trunks, mud flaps, a rally kit that adds a roof scoop and antennas, custom lights and colors, and have a variety of exhausts that come in different colors depending on their level. So in total, there is a healthy level of personalization here. Considering how large the car roster is, especially for the time, I think this is a great set of options. And it does get even better with the paint and livery system. Every car is going to let you pick from some manufacturer paint colors, but you also get a full RGB slider to create really any color you want, and can do a chameleon paint on most cars too. Then you can move on to decals and vinyls, and the sticker system is one of my favorites in any game, but the vinyl system, not so much. Let's start with the sponsor stickers. So throughout the game, sponsors will offer you challenges that, once completed, let you sign that brand as a sponsor. This also unlocks the use of their sticker. You can place stickers on set locations all over the car, like the front, side, and rear glass, front quarter panel, front and rear bumper, and so on. There are 16 slots for stickers on every car, and certain brands will pay you more for being in certain slots. For example, Frame Master will give you about 140k after every official race if you have their logo on your windshield, but only 3 grand if they're on your front bumper. So this creates a sort of mini game of figuring out what sponsors pay the most, where they like to be on the car, and how to most optimally use the slots available to you. And then throughout the game, it creates this immersive and realistic visual progression where your car is continuously transforming into more and more of a race car. car with more and more sponsor decals all over that actually reflect the sponsors you signed. I absolutely love this system. A few other games have done something similar. Juiced comes to mind, but I just think it's such a cool mechanic that does reflect an aspect of real car culture in a way that most games don't. Now, the vinyl system, on the other hand, is an example of taking realism maybe a bit too far, because while there is a decent level of depth to it, it's not user-friendly, because you can't see vinyls on the car until you've applied them. You just get to browse through a catalog of options where you can see the vinyl off the car, and this makes it really tedious to create nice-looking and cohesive liveries, to the point where I kinda just ignored the system entirely throughout my playthrough. I'm glad it's there. You can make some really cool liveries when combining everything with sponsor decals, but I do wish we had some modern comforts here. Now let's talk performance customization, because this is another area where there are some highlights and some lower points. You do have a pretty full suite of realistic mods, from turbo kits and intercoolers to differentials and brakes. It's actually a fairly similar list to something you might expect from Forza. Every part also has levels, usually from 1 to 5, and you'll unlock access to those higher levels throughout the career. Similar again to Forza, some parts will also unlock tuning adjustments. For example, upgrading your transmission will let you play with gear ratios, and upgrading the suspension will unlock settings for ride height and camber, among others. You also have detailed per-car adjustment of things like ABS and traction control, which is always nice to see. And if you upgrade the ECU, or ROM as it's called in-game, you can even mess with dyno tuning to adjust the power band of any car. And at any point you can swap parts around, rerun the dyno, and save a handful of different runs to compare against. They even have a variety of custom test tracks in the game for you to experiment to your heart's content. Even though most of this stuff won't be necessary throughout an average playthrough, this is the kind of depth and realism that I love seeing in my car games. I'm a car geek. I want to be able to get nerdy with my builds. Dyno tuning is a major part of real car culture, and not too many games let me do that anymore. This system again reminds me a bit of Juiced back in the day, or of course much more so Underground 2, which also was one of the few games ever to have some form of dyno tuning and a custom test track. So by and large, the upgrade system for TXRD2 is a delight. It's got all the options and freedom you could want, but it does have a pretty weird quirk as well. One that I actually didn't see mentioned in any of the reviews I read through. Maybe it's because they just never figured it out or even realized it existed in the first place. A lot of TXR veterans that came through my chat during the streams didn't even fully understand this system either. So for both the engine and turbo upgrades, you'll have different brands of parts to select from. You can buy, for example, HRM or AKP pistons of the same level. And for each engine type, there is a secret combination of brands that gives you extra power. Now the game tells you about this plenty of times, and it does let you know when you're onto something by displaying a moderate or critical message when you've found matching parts, but it does a fairly poor job of explaining the mechanic and never tells you which brands to match up in order to find that perfect combo. This means that if you want to find out what parts work together on your own, you need to buy a lot of parts to mix and match with. Once you do figure out the magic combo for an engine type though, that combo works for every car with that engine. So all inline engines have the same combo, for example. And ultimately, like I mentioned earlier, money does come pretty easy, so buying up a few extra parts to test with isn't a major hit. It's really just another case of dealing with too many menus, which feels like a slog. And this is a mechanic you will want to figure out because it can give you huge power increases. I see where they were going with the whole thing, again trying to inject some realism and modding methodology into the game, but again it just results in an overly convoluted system. If you want to, you can just look up a guide to get the combos though, and at the end of the day, it's just a weird quirk in an otherwise really well detailed upgrade system. So overall, between the amazing car roster, solid visual upgrades, and detailed performance mods, I think the cars and customizations in TXRD2 are fantastic, and I don't think the reviews do this justice. Maybe it's because the car list is somewhat niche, especially for back then, and maybe it's because Need for Speed was knocking customization out of the park at the time, but reflecting back on Drift 2 now, I definitely think this has some of the better cars and customization I've seen over the years. And speaking of the best things I've seen over my years playing racing games, TXRD2's vibe and energy is unmatched. Let's just start by taking it all the way back to the game's intro. This is one of the best video game intros I think I've ever seen. The music is banging, all the shots are sick, and it also conveys the game's place within the TXR series. It shows off how the highway racers in Tokyo are now heading to the mountains to compete there, and it just oozes style. I highly encourage you to watch the full thing with its original audio because it's a treat. All the courses and rival bosses also get their own intro cinematics, which are really cool. Like, the course intros just get you super pumped to drive at that location, and the boss intros, I always looked forward to these so much. They impart such a mystical energy to each car and driver, and I don't want to spoil things here, but let's just say that the entire world and story of Initial D is essentially canon within TXRD2. So if you're a fan of that series, definitely keep an eye out for that in this game. The music throughout the whole game is also really fun. They use it like Gran Turismo in the way that all the different menus have their own themes. Like, just listen to the swap between daytime and night. It goes from that bright, upbeat energy to this mysterious and dark tone in such a fun way, and even many of the bosses get their own custom themes. My only real critique here was that the list of songs for standard races was pretty small. I think it was literally 3 to 5 tracks, but it gets broken up so often that you rarely notice it, and the overall track list does a great job of conveying the spirit of the game. I'm sad that most of the reviews ignored this, because to me it was yet another major highlight. So, Tokyo Xtreme Racer Drift 2. Were the reviews right? Well, I do see where many of their points come from, and I do think TXR as a whole is a series that focuses intentionally on a niche part of car culture that these reviewers just weren't a part of, especially considering how much more niche it was in the West at that time. However, even considering that, I think these reviews were still unfairly negative to many elements of the game I viewed quite fondly. G4's opening line of their review says, quite sarcastically, "At some point in the last few years, someone, no one's quite sure who, decided that Japanese-style drift racing was cool. To that person, I say this: thanks a lot. Because of you, we have to deal with Tokyo Xtreme Racer Drift 2. It's a niche game for a niche audience, and it's got its quirks, but within that audience, it's incredible, and for good reason. To me, this feels in many ways like a blend of 2 of my favorite racing games of all time, Gran Turismo 4 and Underground 2, just wrapped up in a TXR blanket. The reviews were wrong, for me anyway. I absolutely loved my time with it, and I will still be working my way towards the Emotional King and beyond once this review is over. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you all think about TXRD2 if you want to, and I'll see you in the next video.